the snowstorm came faster than anyone had expected. What began as a quiet winter drizzle had transformed into a blinding wall of white, swallowing the mountain road in a matter of hours. Marco, 27 and relatively new to the corporate grind, had never been behind the wheel in such conditions. Yet here he was, gripping the steering wheel of his small rental car, eyes darting from the road markers to the roaring expanse of snow around him. The mountain hotel he was trying to reach should have appeared hours ago, yet the storm made everything a blur, an endless white that seemed to stretch into infinity. He had volunteered for this trip, thinking it would be straightforward. A simple handoff, deliver a set of client documents to the hotel where his boss's wife, Claudia, was attending a weekend retreat. It seemed harmless enough. Marco had never met Claudia in person before, only exchanged polite emails and seen her in photographs at company events. She was striking in every sense, blonde, elegant, and always exuding a confidence that seemed impossible to approach. At 47, she carried herself with a grace and authority that made even seasoned executives slightly wary. Marco, on the other hand, was young, ambitious, and painfully aware of the gap between himself and the people he worked for. But something about this assignment had stirred both nerves and curiosity. The first sign of trouble came when the car slid slightly on an icy patch, forcing him to countersteer sharply. His heart raced, but he managed to regain control. Then the headlights illuminated a fallen tree across the road. Panic and adrenaline combined as he swerved to avoid it, the tires spinning in the snow. He braked hard, the car fishtailing, finally coming to a shaky stop a few feet from the obstacle. He cursed under his breath and rubbed his hands over his face, fogged by both stress and the heat from the car heater. It was going to be a long night. By the time he arrived at the hotel entrance, a charming stone building nestled among pines, the storm was relentless. Snow whipped across the windows, and the wind rattled the doors. He parked hastily and struggled out of the car, his briefcase clutched tightly. Inside, the hotel lobby was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the blizzard outside. The fireplace crackled, casting flickering light on dark wood paneling and plush furniture. Guests huddled in small groups, murmuring and sipping hot drinks, all looking equally stranded. Marco's eyes scanned the room, searching for Claudia. He spotted her immediately. She was seated in a corner by the fireplace, a book in hand, but she wasn't reading. Her eyes, a piercing shade of blue, scanned the room as if cataloging every detail, every person. When she finally noticed Marco, a faint, polite smile curved her lips, but her posture remained perfectly composed, elegant and untouchable. "Mr. Rossi?" she asked, her voice smooth and controlled. Marco swallowed nervously. "Yes, Marco Rossi. I have the documents you requested." He handed over the folder, feeling the weight of the moment far heavier than the physical weight of the papers. Claudia took them with a nod, her fingers brushing his hand briefly. Marco felt a shiver run down his spine, though he tried to hide it. "Thank you. It's been difficult coordinating these things with the storm," she said, her gaze lingering on him for a fraction longer than necessary. Before he could respond, the hotel manager approached, frowning. "Ladies and gentlemen, the storm has worsened. Roads are officially closed. Anyone not staying tonight? I'm afraid you're trapped." Marco's stomach dropped. He glanced at Claudia. Her composed expression didn't falter, but there was a flicker of acknowledgment in her eyes, a recognition that circumstances had suddenly shifted. "Well," she said lightly, closing her book, "it seems we're all in for an unexpected night." Marco wanted to offer a witty response, something that would sound charming, but all he could manage was a nervous laugh. They were escorted to a corridor of rooms reserved for long-stay guests. Marco's room was small, modest, with a single bed and a desk by the window, but it was functional. Claudia's suite, by contrast, was expansive, overlooking the snow-laden pines, decorated in elegant tones, with a fireplace and plush seating. He lingered in the hallway after she had entered, unsure whether he should leave or wait. To his surprise, Claudia's voice called out softly. "Mr. Rossi, would you like some tea? It's dreadful weather for venturing out again, and the lounge is quite empty." Marco's heart skipped a beat. I'd love that. Thank you." The two found themselves in her suite's lounge area, the fire crackling behind them. Tea was poured into delicate porcelain cups, the scent of chamomile and honey filling the room. Marco felt acutely aware of the proximity, the warmth of the fire, the subtle scent of her perfume, and the faint nervous energy that seemed to radiate between them. For a while, conversation started cautiously. Mundane topics, weather, travel difficulties. But as the storm raged outside, something shifted. With the electricity intermittently flickering, the atmosphere became intimate in a way neither of them had anticipated. The enforced stillness, the isolation, it all felt suspended from reality. Marco found himself laughing at anecdotes he normally wouldn't dare share. Small confessions about city life, his awkward encounters at the office, even his fear of heights that made driving through the mountains terrifying. Claudia listened, genuinely amused, and for the first time, Marco saw her not just as the boss's wife, but as a person with depth, humor, and warmth. A sudden blackout plunged the room into darkness, leaving only the fire's glow. Marco's breath caught slightly, the room now quiet except for the wind howling outside and the soft crackle of wood. "Looks like we're truly at the mercy of the storm," Claudia said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Marco nodded, his own voice barely audible. I guess so. It's nice, though. I mean, this kind of quiet. It's peaceful." There was a pause. Then, as if drawn by the same impulse, Claudia shifted slightly closer on the couch, the warmth from her body brushing against his. Marco's pulse quickened. He wanted to speak, to say something clever or charming, but words failed him. Instead, their eyes met, a mixture of curiosity, tension, and something unspoken lingering in the flickering shadows of the firelight. The storm outside continued, relentless and unyielding, yet inside the suite, time seemed to slow, each second stretching longer than the last. Marco realized he was caught between awe and desire, awed by her presence, desire sparking in the forbidden space that circumstances had created. He knew it was dangerous, unthinkable even, but the allure of the moment was intoxicating. Then Claudia's hand moved, almost imperceptibly, brushing against his. Marco's heart raced, yet he didn't pull away. She smiled softly, a mixture of mischief and something more tender. The storm howled outside, indifferent to human rules and propriety, as if the mountain itself had conspired to create this stolen moment. The fire cast long, dancing shadows across the room, stretching the space between them while simultaneously shrinking it. Marco felt the weight of her gaze as he tried to focus on the steam rising from his cup of tea, but every flicker of light seemed to draw him deeper into the orbit of Claudia's presence. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was charged, a tangible hum that made his palms sweat despite the warmth of the room. "Marco," Claudia said softly, breaking the silence, "you don't often see me like this, do you?" He blinked, unsure if she meant the casual setting, the storm, or him. I suppose not," he managed, fumbling with his cup. "Most people see you at the office or at events. You always seem untouchable." Claudia's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Untouchable," she repeated, testing the word. "Perhaps. But out here, in the mountains, with the world buried under snow, even I can't maintain that image. Sometimes circumstances make one more human." Marco swallowed hard. Her words stirred something inside him, a mix of intrigue and a thrill he couldn't quite articulate. He wanted to probe further, to ask what she meant, but a crackle from the fireplace drew his attention. The shadows danced again, and the room seemed smaller, warmer, closer. He found himself leaning forward, just slightly, as if gravity, or perhaps fate, were pulling him toward her. Claudia's hand rested on the arm of the couch, but in the soft glow of the firelight, it looked closer to him than it should have. His pulse hammered in his ears, yet he tried to maintain a semblance of composure. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she said suddenly, her voice playful but with an undertone that made his stomach tighten. Marco chuckled nervously, brushing his fingers against the edge of his cup. I am. It's different. Comfortable, in a way. Comfortable." Claudia raised an eyebrow, amused. "For an intern, you've certainly learned to articulate yourself well. I'd expect nervous rambling, not comfortable conversation." Marco's cheeks warmed. "Well, maybe the situation demands something else. I mean, we're stuck here. There's no one else around, no distractions," he trailed off, realizing how bold his words sounded, how dangerously truthful. Claudia's gaze lingered on him, studying him in a way that made him feel exposed yet strangely seen. "Yes," she said finally, her tone softening, "there's freedom in being stranded. No expectations. No rules." The storm outside intensified. Snow pelted the windows with relentless force, and gusts of wind made the entire suite shiver. Marco imagined the roads covered in layers of ice and snow, completely impassable. The thought of leaving, or anyone leaving, was impossible. The idea that they were alone in this secluded mountain hotel, insulated from the world, added a heady sense of danger and intimacy. Claudia shifted again, moving closer on the couch, and Marco's breath caught. He knew he shouldn't feel this way, shouldn't let the forbidden thrill of proximity affect him, yet the pull was undeniable. Her perfume, subtle but intoxicating, filled the space between them, and the warmth from the fire seemed insufficient to counter the heat building in the room. "Marco," she murmured, almost a whisper, "do you ever wonder what it would be like to step outside the boundaries?" He froze, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Step outside the boundaries?" "Yes," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "To break free of rules, of expectations, even of propriety. To allow yourself a moment, a choice, that you might regret or remember forever." The words struck him with unexpected force. He realized that this wasn't just idle conversation. There was an invitation in her tone, an unspoken dare that made his pulse spike. Marco wanted to speak, to form a reply, but every word seemed to falter under the weight of the moment. Instead, he reached for the teacup again, though his hands trembled slightly. He caught her gaze and felt the unspoken tension stretch between them like a taut wire. There was a crackle in the air, a magnetic pull that neither could deny. He wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. She wasn't supposed to be alone with him, not under circumstances that could so easily unravel into something forbidden. And yet, the danger made it all the more exhilarating. Claudia leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "Marco, you're different from what I expected. More grounded, more present. Most young men your age seem impatient, eager to impress, clumsy in their confidence. But you hold yourself with a sort of quiet patience. I find it intriguing." Marco felt his heart race, his throat dry. Compliments from her were rare, but this was different, intimate, carefully measured. It was as though she were peeling away the layers of expectation he had wrapped around himself and seeing him as he truly was. He cleared his throat. I appreciate that. Truly. I've always respected you, from afar, I suppose. Never thought I'd have the chance to actually talk with you like this." Claudia's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "And now you do." Her hand moved again, this time subtly closer, brushing against his knee. Marco's breath hitched. The contact was electric, and the room seemed to shrink further, the firelight illuminating the tension that pulsed in the space between them. For a long moment neither spoke. Outside, the storm roared, indifferent to the human drama unfolding within the suite. Inside, there was a different kind of storm, a quiet, simmering tempest of desire and hesitation. Marco's mind raced. Every rational thought screamed at him to pull away, to retreat to the safety of his room, to remember the boundaries he was not supposed to cross. Yet another, far louder part of him whispered in urgent insistence to stay, to explore, to feel what it was like to be dangerously close to someone as magnetic as Claudia. Then she moved even closer, her knee brushing his in the most casual way possible, yet the intention was unmistakable. "Marco, I've never had a night like this," she murmured. "And somehow, I think you feel it too." Marco's chest tightened. He nodded slowly, unable to speak, the firelight reflecting in his wide eyes. For the first time in his life, he understood the pull of a forbidden attraction, the thrill of proximity, the danger of temptation, the intoxicating mix of respect, desire, and opportunity. The storm outside continued, relentless and unyielding. But in the suite, a different kind of storm was building, one neither could deny, one that promised a night none of them would forget. The room seemed smaller with each passing minute. Marco could feel the heat radiating off the fire, but it wasn't the flames warming him. It was Claudia's presence, the subtle brush of her hand against his knee, the magnetic pull of her gaze. His chest tightened with anticipation, and every logical thought fled his mind. He had never been in a situation like this before, and yet part of him had always secretly imagined moments like this, dangerous, thrilling, impossible. Claudia shifted slightly, settling more comfortably on the couch. Her knee brushed his again, deliberately this time, and Marco's hand twitched as if it had a mind of its own. He couldn't pull away, nor did he want to. Every fiber of his being urged him to stay close, to savor the proximity, to breathe in the scent of her perfume and feel the warmth of her skin. "You're trembling," Claudia said softly, her eyes narrowing with a mix of amusement and concern. Marco's throat went dry. I'm fine," he stammered, though he knew she could see through the flimsy excuse. He tried to focus on the tea, on the delicate porcelain cup he held, but it felt meaningless in comparison to the charged atmosphere. Claudia leaned back, giving him a fraction of space, but her presence remained overwhelming. "You know, Marco," she said, her voice low and intimate, "there are times when life gives us opportunities we're not meant to take, but we do anyway." Marco's heart thudded in his chest. He wanted to ask her what she meant, but the words caught in his throat. The implication hung between them, heavy and irresistible. He wanted to resist, to remind himself that she was his boss's wife, that this was wrong in every conceivable way, but the tension, the storm outside, the isolation, it all conspired to erase those boundaries. The storm raged on, snow slamming against the windows in gusts that shook the hotel. The lights flickered again, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Marco realized he was acutely aware of every small sound, the crackle of the fire, the soft hum of the heating system, the faint rustle of Claudia's clothing as she shifted. It all seemed amplified in the quiet of the suite. Claudia's eyes softened, and for the first time Marco saw vulnerability there, a fleeting glimpse behind the poised, controlled exterior she usually displayed. It made him feel bold, reckless even, as if the universe had conspired to allow them this moment. "Marco," she whispered, leaning slightly closer, "do you trust me?" The question sent a shiver down his spine. I think I do," he managed, his voice barely audible. He didn't know if he was speaking of her personally, or the unspoken circumstances that had brought them together. She smiled, a small, secretive smile that made his pulse spike. "Good. Because tonight, we don't have to pretend. We don't have to follow rules. Not here. Not now." Marco swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing heart. "Claudia, She raised a finger, silencing him gently. "Sure. Just stay here. With me." The air between them was thick, almost tangible, as if the storm outside had seeped into the room, leaving only heat and desire in its wake. Marco felt his resolve weakening with each passing second. His hand twitched, caught between the urge to reach for her and the hesitation born of the knowledge that this was dangerous territory. Claudia moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. The brush of her shoulder against his sent jolts of electricity through him, and he finally allowed himself a small, tentative touch, his hand resting lightly on hers. Her skin was warm, soft, and firm, and the contact was enough to make his pulse race. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hands slightly, entwining their fingers, a silent invitation. Marco's breath caught, and he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about rules, expectations, or propriety. All that existed was the moment, the heat, the tension, the undeniable attraction between them. Claudia's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "There it is," she murmured. "The side of you I suspected was hiding behind all that caution." Marco's heart thundered in his chest. I can't believe this is happening," he whispered, though the thrill of it coursed through him like fire. "Believe it," she replied softly, her eyes locked on his. "Sometimes the impossible moments are the ones worth remembering." The fire crackled behind them, throwing shadows across the room that seemed to move with a life of their own. Marco's gaze lingered on her face, the delicate curve of her cheek, the sparkle in her eyes, the soft sweep of her blonde hair catching the flickering light. Every detail was magnified, every breath shared between them heavy with anticipation. He leaned in slightly, the air between them charged with unspoken promises and uncharted territory. Claudia mirrored the movement, closing the tiny gap, her presence overwhelming and magnetic. Marco's mind screamed caution, but his body, heart, and instincts overruled every warning. "Marco," she whispered again, a hand brushing against his cheek, "tonight, just let yourself feel." His resolve shattered completely. He leaned closer, their faces inches apart, breaths mingling, hearts racing in tandem. The world outside, the storm, the snow, the isolation, faded into nothing. There was only this, only them, only the tension and heat that had been simmering since the moment they met in the lobby. Claudia's lips hovered near his, a teasing, tantalizing distance, and Marco could barely contain himself. The smell of her perfume, the warmth of her breath, the subtle shift of her body toward his, it was intoxicating, addictive. His hand moved instinctively, brushing against her arm, feeling the smooth texture of her skin, the subtle firmness beneath her clothing. She responded immediately, leaning closer, her hand resting gently on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Marco's breath hitched, and for a long, suspended moment, time seemed to stand still. The storm outside raged, but inside the suite, a different kind of storm had begun, a storm of desire, tension, and forbidden attraction. And then, finally, their lips met. It was electric, slow at first, testing the waters, a gentle brush that sent sparks flying through Marco's body. Claudia's hand moved to the back of his neck, drawing him closer, deepening the kiss. Marco responded instinctively, hands moving to her waist, feeling the warmth, the subtle curves, the undeniable magnetism that had drawn him in from the very start. The world outside disappeared entirely. The storm, the hotel, the rules, they all ceased to exist. There was only the kiss, the heat, the undeniable, forbidden connection that had been building since the moment they met. When they finally parted, breaths heavy, foreheads resting together, Marco felt a mixture of exhilaration, guilt, and awe. Claudia's eyes sparkled, a mixture of mischief and desire, and he knew that the night was only beginning. "Marco," she whispered, a soft laugh escaping her lips, This is going to be a very long night." He nodded, unable to speak, his heart still racing, his mind spinning, yet feeling more alive than ever. Outside, the storm continued, relentless and unyielding. Inside, a different kind of storm had taken hold, a storm of desire, connection, and the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted, yet both had been secretly yearning for. The storm outside had become a relentless howl, snowdrifts piling against the windows, the wind rattling the ancient panes with violent persistence. Inside the suite, The fire crackled, casting long, flickering shadows across the room, yet it was nothing compared to the heat building between Marco and Claudia. Their kiss lingered in his mind, echoing with a mix of thrill, guilt, and forbidden desire that made his pulse race. He had never experienced anything like this, never felt so simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. Claudia pulled back slightly, just enough to look into his eyes. "You're trembling again," she observed softly, a playful glint in her own gaze. Marco tried to steady himself, to regain some shred of composure, but it was impossible. I can't help it," he admitted, his voice low. "Everything, it's—" he gestured vaguely, as if words could encompass the intensity of the moment, but they fell short. Claudia's expression softened, and she reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. "It's all right, Marco. There's no right or wrong here. Just us. For now, just this moment." Her words were like a bomb and a spark all at once. Marco felt the tension inside him begin to coalesce into something more deliberate, something he had never allowed himself before. He had always been careful, cautious, respectful of boundaries, yet now those lines felt blurred, erased by the intensity of the situation. They settled back onto the couch, sitting close, almost touching, their knees brushing with every subtle movement. Claudia's hand rested lightly on his, and Marco's fingers twined with hers almost instinctively. Every small gesture carried a weight, a significance amplified by the storm and isolation that surrounded them. The hotel seemed forgotten, the guests elsewhere forgotten, the world outside no longer mattered. "You know," Claudia murmured, her voice soft and intimate, "I never imagined I'd find myself here, like this, sharing a fire, tea, and more with someone like you." Marco's stomach tightened. "Someone like me?" he echoed, a mix of disbelief and wonder in his tone. "You mean an intern?" She smiled, a teasing, enigmatic smile. "Yes, an intern. Young, inexperienced, yet unexpectedly captivating. There's a sort of raw honesty about you, Marco, that is rare. Most people my age have forgotten how to be unguarded, how to feel something without restraint. You remind me of that." The compliment sent a shiver down his spine, a combination of pride, awe, and the dangerous thrill of the forbidden. He opened his mouth to respond, to tell her how much he respected her, how impossible this was, but she placed a finger gently against his lips, silencing him. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let the moment speak for itself. Let the fire, the storm, us, guide the night." Marco's breath hitched, and he found himself leaning toward her again, drawn by forces he could not name. His hand brushed her cheek lightly, feeling the warmth of her skin, the softness that seemed almost impossible to describe. Claudia's eyes closed briefly at his touch, and when she opened them again, there was a mixture of anticipation and amusement that made his heart race even faster. The blackout earlier had left a lingering sense of vulnerability, and now, with only the firelight and the occasional flicker of electricity, the room felt cocooned, intimate, secretive. Every glance, every movement, every brush of skin against skin was amplified, electric. Marco felt like he was navigating a new world, one where rules no longer applied, and where desire dictated the course. Claudia shifted closer, her lips hovering near his once more. "Marco," she murmured, her voice low, "do you ever wonder why we wait for circumstances like this? Why we don't act on what we feel in the daylight, under scrutiny?" Marco's pulse quickened. I guess fear, propriety, rules," he replied, though each word felt inadequate. "But I think this feels right. Here. No. Even if it's wrong." She smiled, the corners of her lips lifting in a mixture of mischief and something far deeper. "Right or wrong doesn't exist here. Only now. Only this." Their faces drew closer, and this time the kiss was deliberate, deeper, more urgent. Marco felt the tension inside him melt into desire, an intoxicating combination of longing and fear. Claudia responded in kind, her fingers threading through his hair, holding him close. Every second stretched, every heartbeat magnified in the quiet intimacy of the suite. Hours seemed to pass unnoticed. The storm outside showed no sign of relenting, yet inside, Marco and Claudia navigated a delicate dance of touch and intimacy, a world apart from the expectations and boundaries of the corporate world. There was laughter too, soft chuckles between kisses, a shared awareness of the absurdity and danger of the situation. Yet beneath the levity, an undeniable connection deepened, binding them in ways neither had anticipated. At some point, they fell back against the couch, bodies entwined but not fully, hands lingering, eyes locked, breaths mingling. Marco realized that this night would leave a mark, an imprint far beyond fleeting passion. There was something emotional, something raw and vulnerable, in the way Claudia allowed herself to be near him, to share this forbidden closeness. "You're incredible," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers, struggling to find the words for the storm of feelings inside him. Claudia's smile was soft, almost tender. "So are you, Marco. And that's why this is dangerous. Because, the more we feel, the harder it will be to go back to reality once the storm passes." Marco shivered at her words, knowing she was right. This was temporary, precarious, yet intoxicating. And still, he didn't want to stop. He didn't want to think about tomorrow, or the rules, or the consequences. There was only the now, the fire, the storm, the closeness, the electricity that surged between them. Eventually, exhaustion began to creep in, not from restraint but from the intensity of emotion and anticipation. They remained close, foreheads together, sharing quiet breaths, the firelight flickering across their faces. Marco could feel Claudia's hand on his chest, the steady beat of her heart, grounding him in the midst of chaos. The storm outside showed no mercy, but inside the suite there was a fragile, heated cocoon, a space suspended in time where desire, tension, and the thrill of the forbidden had collided. Marco knew that the night was far from over, and that whatever happened in these hours would change everything. Yet for the first time in his life, he didn't want to think about rules, consequences, or propriety. He only wanted to exist in the moment, with her, as the storm raged on outside. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, but the warmth in the room, and between them, was far from fading. Marco sat on the edge of the couch, his mind spinning from the intensity of what had just unfolded, though they had not yet crossed certain lines both understood and unspoken. Claudia's presence was magnetic, a force that seemed to pull at him from every direction. Every brush of her hand, every glance, sent shivers down his spine. He felt both exhilarated and terrified, caught between desire and propriety, a tightrope he was unsure he could navigate safely. Claudia, meanwhile, seemed equally aware of the tension in the room. She leaned against the armrest of the couch, her body angled toward him in a casual yet deliberate way. Her eyes sparkled with amusement and something deeper, something Marco could not quite name. "Marco," she said softly, her tone gentle yet edged with playful daring, "how is it possible that you remain so composed even in moments like this?" He laughed nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "Composed? I'm far from composed. I don't even know how to describe this. Everything feels amplified. The storm, the isolation, being here with you, it's unreal." She tilted her head slightly, studying him, her gaze penetrating. "Amplified, yes. Unreal, perhaps. But sometimes the unreal moments are the ones that reveal who we truly are." Marco swallowed hard, understanding her meaning on a level deeper than words could express. Tonight was a revelation, a test of restraint, curiosity, and unspoken longing. And despite the gravity of the situation, a mischievous part of him thrilled at the forbidden nature of it all. Claudia shifted again, closing the small gap between them. Her hand brushed his arm, lingering for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, and Marco felt a current of electricity course through him. He knew what it was, a mix of anticipation, desire, and the intoxicating danger of proximity. For a moment, he dared to imagine what it would feel like to surrender completely to the pull between them, to let the storm outside mirror the storm inside. "You know," Claudia murmured, her voice soft, "being trapped has its advantages. We're free from prying eyes, from expectation, from judgment. Out there, in the world, everything is governed by rules. Here, we can be ourselves." Mako's heart raced at her words. I want that. To be myself. With you. Here. Now." Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "Then why hesitate?" He swallowed hard, acutely aware of the tension coiling inside him. Hesitation had never felt so excruciating. Every moment spent merely inches away from her was agony. Yet there was an unspoken understanding. They had reached a delicate boundary. Crossing it could change everything, for better or worse, and they were both aware of the stakes. The storm outside intensified, snow slamming against the windows in relentless gusts. Marco could almost feel the cold pressing against the glass, a stark contrast to the heat building between them. It was a strange paradox. The world outside was hostile, unyielding, and dangerous, while inside, the warmth of proximity, desire, and quiet understanding created a sanctuary. Claudia leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing his, sending a jolt through him that left him momentarily breathless. "Marco, I've spent years maintaining control," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've followed rules, managed appearances, and upheld expectations. But tonight, I want to forget all of that. Just for a little while. Can you do that with me?" Mako's pulse thundered in his ears. I think I can," he replied, though his voice trembled slightly. "I want to." Their eyes met, and for a long moment silence filled the room. It was not awkward but charged, a language of unspoken intentions, shared desire, and curiosity. Marco could feel his resolve weakening with every heartbeat. He was captivated, enthralled, and utterly drawn to her in a way that defied logic or propriety. Slowly, deliberately, Claudia's hand moved, brushing against his wrist, then his hand, until their fingers intertwined. Marco's breath hitched at the contact, and he realized that he no longer cared about boundaries. The storm outside, the hotel, the world, they were all irrelevant. What mattered was this moment, this connection, this undeniable attraction that had been simmering since the moment they first met in the lobby. "You feel it too, don't you?" Claudia whispered, leaning in slightly, her lips near his ear. Marco's pulse quickened. "Yes, more than I can explain." She smiled softly, almost tenderly, and Marco's heart ached with anticipation. The physical proximity, the warmth, the subtle brush of skin against skin, it was intoxicating, overwhelming, and addictive. Every instinct screamed to move closer, to surrender to the undeniable chemistry that had consumed them both. 4 hours, they navigated a delicate dance of touch and restraint. Every brush of hand against hand, every lingering glance, every shared breath was magnified by the storm's isolation. The hotel, the firelight, the snow, they became mere backdrops to the intimate world they were building in that room. Marco felt a growing connection to Claudia, a bond that transcended age, status, and expectation. She was more than the boss's wife. She was a woman of depth, wit, and warmth, and the vulnerability she displayed tonight made her even more compelling. He realized he was falling, not just for the thrill of forbidden attraction, but for the person behind the poised, controlled exterior. Claudia leaned back against the couch, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Marco, promise me something," she said softly. "Anything," he replied immediately, the word leaving his lips before he could think. "Promise me that, no matter what happens, we'll remember this night, not as a mistake, not as something forbidden, but as a night we allowed ourselves to feel. Truly feel. Without fear. Without expectation." Marco nodded, his throat tight. "I promise." A shared silence followed, filled with warmth, understanding, and a mutual acknowledgment of the bond forming between them. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, but inside, they had created a sanctuary, a cocoon of intimacy, tension, and unspoken connection that neither had anticipated. Hours passed in this suspended state. The fire had burned low, and the room was bathed in shadows and soft moonlight filtering through the snow-streaked windows. Marco and Claudia remained close, sometimes talking in hushed tones, sometimes sharing quiet laughter, and sometimes simply existing in the electric stillness that enveloped them. And through it all, one truth became undeniable. Their lives, their choices, and their world would never be the same after this night. The storm outside showed no sign of relenting. Gusts of wind whipped against the stone walls of the hotel, rattling the windows and sending sheets of snow swirling into the darkness beyond. Inside the suite, however, the fire had dwindled to a soft glow, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to mirror the tension and anticipation coiling between Marco and Claudia. The night had stretched on for hours, yet neither seemed willing or able to break the fragile intimacy that had been building since they first found themselves alone together. Marco could feel it now, deep in his chest, a combination of desire, fear, and exhilaration. Every glance from Claudia, every subtle movement, set his pulse racing. He had never been in a situation like this, never felt such a potent mixture of thrill and danger. And yet, part of him wondered if he had always been waiting for a moment like this without realizing it. Claudia, leaning back slightly against the couch, watched him with a soft, contemplative expression. The firelight highlighted the delicate lines of her face, the subtle curve of her lips, and the brilliant blonde strands that framed her features. She seemed both distant and achingly close, a paradox that made his heart pound. "You're thinking too much," she murmured, her voice low and intimate, carrying a weight that made Marco's stomach tighten. "I can't help it," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything. It's so overwhelming. Being here with you, like this, it's unreal." Claudia's smile was gentle, almost tender. "Unreal, yes. But sometimes the unreal moments are the ones that matter most. The ones that leave an imprint. Don't overthink it. Just feel." Her words resonated with him, striking a chord he hadn't known existed. Marco realized that he had spent most of his life analyzing, calculating, and guarding himself against risk, yet here, with her, all of that seemed irrelevant. He only wanted to exist in this suspended reality, to explore the fragile, forbidden connection that had been forming since the moment they met in the hotel lobby. Slowly, deliberately, Claudia reached out, her hand brushing his. The contact was electric, sending shivers up his spine and igniting a heat that seemed to radiate from the very center of him. He responded instinctively, intertwining his fingers with hers, feeling the warmth and subtle firmness of her skin. The gesture was small, yet loaded with meaning, a silent acknowledgment of the tension, desire, and trust that had been growing between them. "Marco," she whispered, leaning slightly closer, her lips brushing the edge of his ear, "do you know how tempting it is to let go of everything else? To abandon the rules, the expectations, and simply exist here with me?" His breath caught, and he could barely find words. I want to. More than anything. But," he faltered, aware of the danger, the forbidden nature of what they were contemplating. Yet the pull was undeniable, a magnetic force that neither could resist. Claudia's gaze softened, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that left him breathless. "Then let yourself feel, Marco. Don't think. Don't hesitate. Just be." The fire flickered again, shadows dancing across the room as if celebrating the unspoken agreement that had formed between them. Marco's hand moved instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and he felt her lean into the touch. The intimacy was delicate, yet charged with a power that neither could fully contain. They spoke little after that, words unnecessary in the charged silence. Every glance, every brush of skin, every shared breath carried more meaning than language could convey. Marco felt as if he were navigating a new world, one governed by instinct, desire, and the fragile trust that had been established over the past hours. The storm outside intensified, snow slamming against the windows with relentless force. Yet inside, the room had become a cocoon, insulated from the chaos, a private universe where only the two of them existed. Marco realized that he had never felt so alive, so aware of every sensation, every subtle movement, every heartbeat. Claudia's hand rested lightly on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Marco mirrored the gesture, placing his hand over hers, drawing comfort and reassurance from the contact. They remained like that for a long while, simply existing in the warmth, the intimacy, and the quiet intensity of the moment. Eventually, Claudia shifted slightly, her head resting gently against his shoulder. "Marco," she murmured, this connection, this night, it will change us, one way or another." He swallowed hard, knowing she was right. "I know. But I don't want it to end. Not tonight. Not like this." Her fingers traced idle patterns over his chest, a silent promise, a gentle reassurance. "Neither do I," she whispered. "And that's why we must savor it. Every moment. Every heartbeat. Every brush of skin against skin. Before the storm passes, and the world returns." Marco's pulse raced at her words, at the implication that they both understood the fleeting nature of their situation. He realized that, despite the danger and the forbidden nature of their connection, he was willing to risk everything for these stolen hours. The fire had burned low, casting the room in shadows and muted light. The snowstorm outside continued unabated, a reminder of their isolation, their separation from the world beyond the hotel walls. And yet, inside, they had created a fragile, heated sanctuary, a place where desire, connection, and vulnerability could coexist without consequence. Marco's hand brushed against Claudia's cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. She closed her eyes at the touch, leaning into it with a quiet sigh. The gesture, simple yet intimate, spoke volumes about the trust and tension that had developed between them. "I never imagined a night like this," Marco whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Being here with you, it feels like nothing else exists." Claudia opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a mixture of amusement and longing. "That's because, for now, nothing else does exist. Not the office. Not your responsibilities. Not my reputation. Only this moment. Only us." Marco's chest tightened at her words. He knew the night would leave a mark, a memory that would linger long after the storm passed. But he also knew that he would not trade this experience for anything. This rare, intoxicating collision of desire, vulnerability, and connection. The hours passed in suspended time. They spoke in hushed tones, laughed quietly at small observations, and occasionally shared touches that sent shivers down their spines. Every gesture, every glance, every breath was magnified by the isolation, the storm, and the electric chemistry between them. And through it all, one undeniable truth emerged. This night, storm, isolation, and forbidden attraction combined, was something neither of them could forget. It had changed them, irrevocably, for better or worse. Outside, the snow continued to fall in sheets, relentless and unyielding. Inside, a different kind of storm had taken hold, a storm of desire, intimacy, and unspoken connection that would define the night and linger in their hearts long after the first light of morning. The storm had begun to wane, the wind losing some of its violent edge, though the snow still fell relentlessly outside. The mountain hotel, now blanketed in white, felt both isolated and cocooned, a world apart from everything beyond its stone walls. Inside, the suite remained warm, lit by the dying embers of the fire, which cast a soft, flickering glow over Marco and Claudia as they sat in close proximity on the couch. Marco could feel the heat radiating from her body, the subtle brush of her arm against his, the shared warmth that went far beyond the fire. Every glance, every breath, every minute movement between them was charged, loaded with meaning, with desire, with unspoken questions. He had never experienced anything like it, and part of him wondered if he ever would again. Claudia leaned back, her head resting gently against the top of the couch, eyes closed for a moment as if listening to the rhythm of the storm outside, and the storm inside. "Marco," she whispered softly, "tonight is unlike anything I've ever experienced. I've spent years controlling everything, managing appearances, maintaining distance. But now—" Her voice trailed off, a soft sigh escaping her lips, and Marco felt the weight of her words more keenly than he expected. He turned toward her, his gaze lingering on her face, searching for the depth of emotion he knew must be there. "But now?" he prompted gently, his voice low, intimate. Her eyes opened, meeting his with an intensity that made his heart pound. "But now, all that control, all those walls, they mean nothing. Here with you I feel alive. Vulnerable, yes, but alive." Marco's chest tightened at her admission. He understood more than she might have realized, understood the thrill, the fear, the danger, and the freedom that came with surrendering to the moment. He reached for her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles, feeling the warmth and softness of her skin. I feel the same," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Being here with you, it's like nothing else exists. Nothing else matters." A small smile curved Claudia's lips, delicate and knowing. "I think that's the beauty of nights like this," she murmured, "when the world is stripped away, and all that's left is us. No expectations, no judgment, just feeling." Marco's gaze dropped to her lips, the faint glow of the embers illuminating their soft curve. His pulse quickened, the air between them thick with anticipation, desire, and the tension of the forbidden. He had never been so acutely aware of another person, of the subtle, intimate details, the warmth of her breath, the scent of her perfume, the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes seemed to see him in a way no one else ever had. Claudia leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his, a subtle, deliberate movement that sent a jolt of electricity through him. "Marco, do you ever wonder what it would be like to forget the world completely?" she murmured, her lips close to his ear. "To surrender to a night without consequence, without rules, without everything that usually restrains us?" His breath hitched. "Yes," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "More than I can describe." Her smile was soft, almost tender. "Then let yourself feel," she whispered. "Let the night guide us, and forget the rest. Just for now." The fire's glow cast shadows across the room, wrapping them in warmth and intimacy. Marco's hand moved instinctively, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into the touch with a quiet sigh. Their eyes locked, and for a long moment they simply existed together, breathing in the electric silence, feeling the heat, the tension, and the fragile, undeniable connection that had grown between them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Claudia shifted closer, her hand resting lightly on his chest. Marco responded, placing his hand over hers, fingers interlacing, the touch sending ripples of sensation through both of them. The distance that had existed moments ago, both physical and emotional, began to dissolve, replaced by a magnetic pull neither could resist. "Marco," she whispered again, leaning in until their foreheads touched, "promise me something." "Anything," he replied immediately, his heart racing. "Promise me that, whatever happens tonight, we won't regret it. Not as a mistake, not as a lapse in judgment, but as a night where we allowed ourselves to feel completely, unreservedly." Marco nodded, throat tight, words unnecessary. He understood. This was not about impulsive desire alone. It was about connection, intimacy, vulnerability, and the rare, fragile chance to let go of the barriers they both carried. A long silence followed, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the whispering remnants of the storm outside. Yet in that silence the tension remained, growing, drawing them closer. Marco found himself leaning forward, drawn by the invisible thread that had been woven between them, and Claudia met him halfway, lips brushing briefly before pulling back, teasing, lingering. "Marco, careful," she whispered, a small laugh escaping her lips. "We're treading dangerous territory." His breath caught. "I know," he murmured, "but I can't stop myself. I don't want to." The room seemed to shrink, the firelight flickering across their faces as if celebrating the unspoken understanding. Marco's hands moved tentatively, brushing along her arms, her waist, tracing lines that were soft and delicate but filled with tension and anticipation. Claudia responded in kind, a gentle, guiding pressure, showing him where he could dare to go, how far the fragile intimacy could stretch without breaking. Time became a blur. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like seconds. The storm outside became a distant memory, a backdrop to the cocoon of warmth, desire, and forbidden connection that enveloped them. Every glance, every touch, every shared breath was magnified, laden with the promise of what could be, yet tempered by the awareness of what could go wrong. Eventually, they fell back against the couch, bodies still close but not yet fully entwined. Marco's fingers lingered on Claudia's arm, tracing idle patterns, while her hand rested lightly on his chest. Their breaths mingled, hearts racing, eyes locked in a quiet understanding. The night had changed them irrevocably, and yet it was far from over. "Marco," she whispered, her voice soft, almost vulnerable, "tonight will be a memory neither of us will forget. I can feel it." He nodded, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. "I know," he admitted, "and I don't want to forget a single second." Claudia's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, her eyes sparkling with mischief and desire. "Then stay with me," she murmured. "Let the night guide us. Let the storm, and this moment, define us, if only for a little while." Marco's pulse thundered in his chest. He knew that whatever path they took, the night would leave an imprint, a mark that would linger far longer than the storm outside. And yet, despite the danger, despite the forbidden nature of their connection, he was ready to surrender, to feel, to experience, and to exist in the fragile electric cocoon they had created together. The embers glowed faintly, shadows dancing across the walls as Marco leaned closer, their lips meeting once more in a kiss that was deeper, more urgent, and far more intimate than before. The world outside, the storm, the isolation, the rules and expectations, faded entirely, leaving only the heat, the tension, and the undeniable connection between them. The room was quiet now, save for the occasional creak of the old hotel settling and the soft hiss of snow sliding down the slanted roof outside. The storm had diminished to a steady, relentless fall, a muted white curtain that kept the mountain hotel sealed off from the rest of the world. Inside, the suite was filled with a different kind of storm, a storm of heat, tension, and unspoken longing that had been building steadily for hours. Marco sat close to Claudia on the couch, their bodies almost touching, sharing the warmth of the fire and the intimacy of proximity. His hand rested lightly on her arm, brushing over the fabric of her sleeve with gentle curiosity, tracing lines he had memorized in the brief hours since their isolation began. Each small movement sent shivers through him, a mixture of desire and anticipation that left him breathless. Claudia's eyes sparkled, reflecting the amber glow of the firelight, a mixture of amusement, tenderness, and something far deeper. She tilted her head slightly, letting her hair brush his shoulder. "Marco," she murmured, her voice low and intimate, "I never thought I'd find myself here. In a storm, miles from anyone else, alone with you. It feels unreal." Marco's throat tightened. "I feel the same. It's like the world doesn't exist outside this room, outside this moment. It's just us." Her lips curved into a small smile, almost teasing, almost tender. "Exactly. Just us. And yet, the tension between us, it's palpable. I can feel it. Can you?" Marco swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "I can," he admitted. "Every glance, every brush of your hand." I feel it, and I can't stop thinking about it. She leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing against his, a subtle movement that sent sparks racing through him. Marco, sometimes, the impossible moments are the ones worth living for, she whispered. Sometimes, the boundaries we're told never to cross are the ones that teach us the most about ourselves. He swallowed, understanding her words more deeply than she might have realized. This wasn't just desire. This wasn't just temptation. It was a revelation, a raw, intimate exposure of emotion and longing that neither had allowed themselves before. And in the soft glow of the firelight, with the storm sealing them off from the world, it felt impossible to resist. Their hands met again, fingers intertwining naturally, a connection both deliberate and instinctive. Marco felt a jolt of electricity pass through him at the simple touch, a sensation that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. He had never felt so acutely aware of another person, nor so unguarded. Claudia leaned back slightly, her eyes fixed on his. "Marco, this night, it's going to change us," she said softly, her voice tinged with both wonder and apprehension. "One way or another, we'll never be the same after this." "I know," he whispered, his voice catching slightly. "And I don't want it to end. Not tonight. Not like this. Not ever." Her gaze softened, and for a long moment they simply existed in that fragile, intimate bubble. Outside, the snow fell, relentless and cold, but inside, they were insulated from the storm, wrapped in warmth, desire, and the fragile, delicate beginnings of a connection neither had anticipated. Claudia's hand moved slowly up his arm, brushing along his shoulder, tracing lines that were tender and intimate, yet charged with tension. Marco responded instinctively, tilting slightly toward her, feeling the heat radiating from her body, the subtle pressure of her proximity. Each brush of skin against skin was electric, a reminder of the delicate balance they maintained, between desire and restraint, between temptation and caution. "You feel it too, don't you?" Claudia whispered, leaning close enough that her breath tickled his ear. Marco's pulse thundered. "Yes, I feel it. Every second." She smiled softly, a mixture of amusement and vulnerability, and he realized that he had never seen her like this, unmasked, exposed, tender, and yet fiercely alive. It was intoxicating, addictive, and overwhelming. He had spent hours imagining what it would be like to be near her like this, yet reality far surpassed every fantasy. Claudia's lips brushed against his cheek, a fleeting, delicate touch that left him trembling. "Marco, I want to savor this night," she murmured. "Every moment, every heartbeat. Before the storm passes. Before the world returns to its rules and expectations. Can you do that with me?" "I can," he whispered, his voice barely audible, yet resolute. "I want to." The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Marco leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Claudia closed her eyes briefly, leaning into the touch, and he felt a rush of warmth and longing he had never known. They spoke little after that, their words unnecessary. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every shared breath conveyed more than language ever could. Marco's heart pounded with each subtle movement, each fleeting contact, as if the room itself had contracted to accommodate the intensity of their connection. Hours passed in this delicate, charged intimacy. Sometimes they laughed softly at shared observations, sometimes they simply rested close, letting the warmth, the tension, and the quiet electricity between them do all the talking. Marco realized that he had never been so aware of another person, never so attuned to their presence, their subtleties, their breath and heartbeat. Claudia rested her head gently against his shoulder, and Marco draped an arm around her, holding her close in a protective, tentative embrace. "Marco," she whispered, her voice soft and almost vulnerable, "tonight is unforgettable. I can feel it. And even when the storm ends, I don't want to let go." "I don't either," he admitted, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Not tonight." Not ever. The snow continued to fall outside, relentless yet silent, a pale curtain that kept them isolated from the world. Inside, a different storm raged, one of heat, intimacy, tension, and the fragile beginnings of a bond neither of them had anticipated. Marco felt alive in a way he had never known, exhilarated by the forbidden, overwhelmed by desire, yet comforted by the quiet tenderness Claudia offered. The hours stretched into the early morning, the fire reduced to glowing embers, the storm outside finally beginning to subside. Marco and Claudia remained wrapped in their fragile cocoon, sharing whispers, laughter, and the gentle press of bodies close but not fully entwined. They had crossed boundaries unspoken yet understood, explored desires that had been forbidden, and discovered a connection that neither expected, but both knew would linger, indelible, far beyond the storm. And in that quiet, intimate space, suspended between night and dawn, Marco understood something profound. Some nights were meant to change you, to reveal parts of yourself you didn't know existed, to forge connections impossible in the daylight. And this night, with its snow, its isolation, its firelight, and its stolen intimacy, was one of those nights. The first light of dawn seeped through the frost-coated windows, pale and fragile, brushing the edges of the suite with a hesitant glow. Outside, the storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving the mountain blanketed in pristine white silence. The world beyond the hotel seemed distant, almost dreamlike, as if the snow had created a fragile barrier, separating their secluded haven from reality. Inside, the suite was quiet in a different way, less tense than the night had been, but filled with a lingering warmth and intimacy that neither Marco nor Claudia wanted to disturb. They lay on the couch together, bodies still close, limbs intertwined in the aftermath of the night's delicate, thrilling dance. The fire had long since burned down to embers, leaving only a soft residual warmth that complemented the lingering heat between them. Marco's eyes traced the contours of Claudia's face, her hair spilling over the couch cushions, catching the light in a halo of gold. He felt a mixture of awe, desire, and something heavier, something that bordered on reverence. He had never seen her like this, unguarded, open, vulnerable, yet commanding in her presence even in moments of intimacy. Claudia stirred slightly, stretching with a lazy, deliberate grace. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a softness that made his chest tighten. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice husky from sleep and emotion. "Morning," Marco replied, his own voice low, careful, almost reverent. "How did you sleep?" She smiled faintly, a delicate curve of her lips. "Better than I expected," she admitted, tilting her head to rest against his shoulder. "Though it feels strange to wake up after last night. Like we've crossed a line we can't uncross." Marco swallowed, his throat tight. "I know," he murmured. "I've been thinking about it all night. About everything. And I don't regret it. Not for a second." Her gaze softened, and she reached up to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. "Neither do I," she admitted, her fingers lingering against his skin. "But now the world is returning. And with it, responsibilities, expectations, judgment. We can't ignore them forever." Marco's heart sank slightly at the reminder. The hotel, the storm, the isolation, they had created a perfect bubble for intimacy, exploration, and connection. But reality was inevitable. The boundaries that had been suspended for hours would soon reassert themselves, and with them the consequences of their actions. "I know," he said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her hand. "But for this morning, for a little while longer, can we pretend the world doesn't exist?" Claudia chuckled softly, a melodic sound that eased some of the tension in the room. "I think we can manage that," she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement and lingering desire. She shifted slightly, nestling closer to him, the warmth of her body a comforting counterpoint to the chill of the morning. They remained like that for a long while, savoring the fragile, intimate silence. Words were unnecessary. The connection they shared, forged in the fire of the storm and tempered by the electricity of forbidden desire, spoke volumes. Marco traced gentle circles on her arm, memorizing the lines of her skin, the softness beneath his fingers, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing. Eventually, the quiet gave way to conversation, tentative and careful. "Marco," Claudia murmured, her voice tinged with apprehension, "what happens now? After the storm, after this morning?" He hesitated, weighing his words carefully. I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know that I want to hold on to this, whatever it is. Even if it's just for a little while. Even if it's complicated." Claudia's eyes softened, and she reached up to cup his cheek. "It is complicated," she whispered, her thumb brushing lightly across his skin. "But maybe some things worth having are complicated. Maybe this is one of them." Marco nodded, heart racing. The truth was undeniable. Their connection, their intimacy, their stolen night of vulnerability and desire, had changed him. He had never felt so alive, so aware of every sensation, every subtle gesture, every heartbeat. And though the world outside waited, with all its rules and expectations, he wasn't ready to let go of this, of her. Claudia shifted again, leaning her forehead against his. "Marco, I need to be honest," she said softly, her voice a mixture of vulnerability and strength. "Being with you, last night, it was unexpected, intense, forbidden. And yet, I don't regret a single second. But we need to consider what comes next." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "I know. And I don't want to make things harder than they already are. But I also don't want to pretend this night didn't happen, or that the way we feel doesn't matter." Her lips curved into a small, wistful smile. "I feel the same," she admitted. "But the world outside, the storm has passed, Marco. And with it, reality returns. We'll have to navigate it carefully, or risk everything." Marco's hand found hers again, their fingers intertwining as if to anchor them to this fragile moment. "Then let's navigate it together," he said softly. "One step at a time. For now we have this morning. And we have each other. That has to be enough." Claudia's eyes glistened, a mixture of emotion, desire, and the unspoken acknowledgment of what they shared. "For now, yes," she whispered, leaning into him, savoring the warmth, the intimacy, the fleeting sanctuary they had created. Outside, the snow began to glisten in the weak morning light, transforming the landscape into a silent, pristine world. The storm had ended, leaving behind a quiet beauty, a sense of calm, and the inevitability of reality. Inside, Marco and Claudia clung to the cocoon they had created, reluctant to let it go, aware that the day would demand decisions, explanations, and perhaps sacrifices. But for these few hours, suspended between night and dawn, desire and responsibility, they allowed themselves to simply exist, intimate, vulnerable, and profoundly connected. And in that fragile space, Marco realized that some nights, some moments, were meant to leave an indelible mark, not just on the body, but on the heart, on the mind, on the soul. He pressed a soft kiss to Claudia's temple, feeling her warmth, her presence, her heartbeat beneath his hand. "We'll face the world soon," he murmured. "But for now, let's just be here. Together." Claudia smiled, her eyes closing briefly. "Together," she echoed, a promise, a surrender, and a beginning all at once. And as the first rays of sun filtered through the frost-streaked windows, Marco and Claudia held on to each other, savoring the quiet aftermath of the storm, a storm that had changed everything, yet left them with the fragile, intoxicating promise of more. By mid-morning, the storm had finally retreated, leaving the mountain hotel bathed in a crisp, golden light. Snow shimmered across the slopes, pristine and blinding in its purity. The silence of the morning was a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night, yet inside the suite, Marco and Claudia felt the aftershocks of the storm that had raged between them, the night of desire, vulnerability, and connection that neither would forget. Claudia moved first, stretching languidly and tugging the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes met Marco's, the soft firelight and early sunlight mingling across her features, illuminating a face both tender and alluring. "We should get dressed," she murmured, her voice hesitant, betraying the reluctance to leave the cocoon of intimacy they had created. Marco nodded, though his heart clenched at the thought. The comfort, the warmth, the quiet intensity of last night's hours felt irreplaceable, and stepping back into reality seemed almost unbearable. Still, he understood. The world awaited beyond the walls of their secluded haven, and sooner or later they would have to face it. They dressed quietly, movements careful and deliberate, aware of the delicate intimacy they were about to leave behind. Claudia's gaze lingered on him as he buttoned his shirt, her expression a mixture of longing, contemplation, and subtle sadness. Marco felt a pang in his chest, realizing that the storm had not just altered the night, but shifted something deep within both of them. Once they were ready, they stepped out onto the balcony, the crisp air biting against their skin. The view was breathtaking. Mountains glistening under the morning sun, snow stretching endlessly in every direction, and a sky painted in soft pastels of pink and gold. The world felt renewed, pure, and impossibly vast, a stark contrast to the confined, charged cocoon of the hotel suite. Marco inhaled deeply, the cold air filling his lungs, and turned to Claudia. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "But it's nothing compared to you." Her eyes softened, and she reached for his hand, the familiar warmth grounding him. "Marco, last night, it was unexpected, intense, and it will stay with me, whether we want it to or not. But we need to be careful. The world outside, it's unforgiving." He nodded, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I know, and I'm willing to face whatever comes, as long as we hold on to what we have. Even if it's just a spark, a memory. I don't want to lose this." Claudia's lips curved into a small, wistful smile. "Neither do I," she admitted. "But we both know that what happened here, it's dangerous, fragile, and it can't exist in the daylight the same way it did in the storm." Marco's chest tightened at her words, but he understood the gravity. Their connection was intense, forbidden, and charged with emotion, but stepping back into the world meant facing boundaries, judgments, and consequences. Yet he also knew that some bonds were too strong to ignore, even in the face of reality. They lingered on the balcony, hands clasped, eyes tracing the pristine slopes and distant peaks. The air was silent except for the occasional creak of snow-laden branches and the soft whistle of a morning wind. Time seemed suspended, fragile, a fleeting bridge between the intimacy of the night and the responsibilities of the day. Finally, Claudia spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "Marco, whatever happens next, remember this night. Remember the storm, the isolation, the intensity, and remember us. Because, for me, it was real, and it changed everything." He tightened his grip on her hand, feeling the electricity of that connection once more. "I won't forget," he promised. "Neither the night nor you. It's unforgettable, and it will always be a part of me." A silence followed, comfortable yet weighted with unspoken acknowledgment. They had crossed lines, navigated forbidden territory, and discovered something powerful and transformative. The morning light could not erase it, nor could the return of reality. It was etched into their memories, their emotions, their very being. After a few more moments, they reluctantly turned back into the suite to gather their belongings. Marco's suitcase had been packed since the storm began, yet the act of leaving felt heavier now, burdened with emotion and longing. Claudia followed, each movement deliberate, her eyes occasionally meeting his with a mixture of desire, caution, and unspoken questions. As they prepared to depart the hotel, the receptionist, a young man who had survived the storm's chaos, greeted them with a nervous smile. "The roads are clearing," he said, glancing toward the snow-covered exit. You should be able to make it down safely. Marco nodded, adjusting his coat. Thank you, he said, offering a polite smile. Claudia followed suit, her presence poised yet intimate, a lingering echo of the night's intensity. They stepped outside, the cold air crisp against their faces, and the hotel's isolation began to dissolve as the world reasserted itself. Marco could feel the weight of reality pressing in, the office, expectations, boundaries, but he also felt a quiet resolve. Whatever consequences awaited, whatever judgment or restraint, the connection forged in the storm was real, undeniable, and indelible. Claudia glanced at him as they began the descent down the snow-dusted path toward their cars. "Marco, we need to be careful," she murmured, her voice both tender and cautious. "What we have, it's dangerous in the daylight. But I don't want to let it go completely." He squeezed her hand gently, a silent promise. "We won't," he replied softly. "We'll figure it out. Step by step. Whatever it takes." They reached their vehicles, the snow crunching beneath their boots, and paused for a final lingering moment. Marco's gaze met Claudia's, and in her eyes he saw a reflection of every stolen touch, every whispered word, every heartbeat of the storm-soaked night. "Until next time?" he asked, a faint smile on his lips, aware that the unspoken promise between them was more potent than any words could convey. Claudia's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Until next time," she echoed, leaning in for a brief, electrifying kiss that carried the weight of desire, restraint, and unspoken emotion. And with that they parted, each stepping into the renewed world outside the mountain hotel, carrying with them the memory of the storm, the isolation, and the night that had changed everything. The snow sparkled in the morning light, pristine and endless, but the fire they had ignited together, the connection they had forged, would burn far longer, hidden, potent, and impossible to extinguish. As Marco drove down the winding mountain road, he thought of Claudia, of the storm, of the stolen hours of intimacy and vulnerability. He knew the world would demand boundaries, expectations, and propriety, but he also knew something undeniable. Some connections, some nights, and some moments were beyond control, beyond judgment, and beyond time itself. And in that knowledge, Marco found both solace and anticipation, for the next storm, for the next stolen moment, and for the undeniable, forbidden connection that had begun in a hotel high in the mountains, amidst snow, isolation, and a night that neither would ever forget.